wind outside screamed through the broken towers of the Gliese 7 research base, like a hungry animal clawing at the metal walls, as if it wanted in. Inside the base all was silent, cold, and forgotten. It had been years since anyone had walked these halls. Ice clung to the ceilings like frozen vines, and the lights flickered weakly like they were tired of fighting the dark. Mark Ellison stepped through the main door, with slow, careful steps. His boots crunched on the frost-covered floor, and his breath came out in white clouds that vanished fast into the freezing air. He was alone, sent here to check the power lines and restore the communication link. Just one man, one task, and an empty, broken base. At least that was what he thought. He moved through the control room, brushing snow off the consoles and flipping switches one by one. Most systems were dead or frozen, but one small red light blinked deep in the lower decks, far below the ice and steel. He frowned and checked the map. Sublevel 4. It wasn't on his work list. The station logs had nothing on it. Just an old note. Containment Class 3. He should have ignored it. He should have left it alone. But curiosity is a strong thing when you are the only heartbeat in a frozen tomb. The elevator creaked as it dropped down level by level. Lights above him blinked out as he passed them, swallowed by the dark. He reached sublevel 4 and stepped out into a corridor colder than the rest. The walls were covered in ice and strange, deep scratches. Something had clawed at them once and long ago. He followed the blinking red light to a heavy steel door. It hissed open slowly. Inside was a small room, and in the middle of that room was a cell. It was made of thick, reinforced glass, with frost covering its edges. There were no lights inside, just a soft blue glow of emergency power. Mark stepped closer. At first he saw nothing. Just empty space and a cold floor. Then movement. A figure shifted in the dark corner. Crouched low, breathing slow and deep. He leaned in his face near the glass. The creature moved closer too. Its eyes opened. They were bright gold. Not glowing, but shining like coins under moonlight. Its face was sharp and alien, half hidden by long strands of dark hair that clung to her skin like wet ropes. Thin arms, long fingers, and teeth. Sharp teeth behind lips that curled back in a hiss. Mark jumped back. The hiss echoed through the chamber, low and wild and full of hate. The creature stood. It was female, or at least had the shape of one. Tall and thin, with scars down her arms and neck. Her skin was a strange blue-gray. She wore what looked like old torn fabric, now frozen stiff to her body. She stared at him, her head tilted like she was trying to decide what he was. Her eyes blinked once slowly. Then she slammed herself against the glass. Mark fell backward, landing hard on the cold metal. He stared in shock as the alien hissed again, her breath fogging the glass. But she didn't hit it again. She just pressed her hands to it, watching him, studying him. He stood slowly, heart racing. This wasn't part of the mission. This wasn't what he signed up for. He backed out of the room and closed the door. But even through the thick walls, he could still hear the soft sound. The sound of her breath. The sound of her whispering something in a voice too soft and too strange to understand. Back in the control room, Mark found an old logbook covered in frost. He opened it. Pages stuck together, but he found the words. Subject V3. Female. Captured during mining sweep. Aggressive. Dangerous. Do not approach. Containment critical. No one ever came back for her. No one wrote what happened next. Just blank pages. Mark sat there for a long time. His hands cold. His thoughts colder. That creature was alive. Still alive after all these years. Alone. Frozen. Hissing like a monster. But she hadn't broken the glass. She hadn't tried again. She just looked at him. Like she wanted to speak. Like she had something to say. Mark didn't know what she was. Or why she was still here. But he felt something strange. Not fear. Not really. Something else. A pull. A whisper. He looked down the dark hallway. Toward sublevel 4. And he knew one thing for sure. This base was not empty. And he was not alone. The lights flickered again as Mark lay awake in the small crew quarters above the main control deck, with frost creeping in through the cracks in the wall and silence, louder than any alarm he had ever heard. He couldn't sleep. Not after what he saw. Not after what looked back at him. The girl. The creature. The thing in the glass. She was still in his mind. Those glowing gold eyes still burned into his thoughts like fire on paper. She had hissed at him like a beast, but something about her eyes didn't match the sound that came from her mouth. He rose from the narrow bed and moved quietly down the corridor, holding his flashlight low to avoid drawing too much attention to himself, though there was no one else here. Just the dead. Just the frost. And her. Mark entered the kitchen unit. Most of the food supplies were old and expired, but there were a few sealed packs still good. He opened one and poured some dried fruits and protein squares into a metal tray. Then he filled a bottle with clean water. He didn't know why he was doing it, but something in his chest told him he should. She was alive. She had been left. Abandoned. Forgotten. So he went back down. The elevator groaned under the weight of silence as it descended into the lower levels. The red light outside her door was still blinking, as if warning anyone brave or stupid enough to enter. He stepped inside slowly. This time he kept his distance. The girl was still there, curled in the corner of the cell, knees against her chest, arms wrapped around her legs. She looked even thinner now, even weaker. But her eyes opened again as soon as he stepped inside. She hissed once. Not loud this time. Just a warning. A tired one. Like she was too used to people bringing her pain. Mark set the tray down near the glass. She didn't move. Didn't growl. Didn't leap. She only watched. Mark sat on the floor across from her, just a few feet from the cell. He said nothing because he knew she wouldn't understand. But he stayed. He let her see him. Let her know he was still there. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Time felt strange in that frozen place. Then, she moved. Slowly, carefully. She stood and walked to the edge of the cell, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. Her fingers touched the glass. Then she looked down at the food. She didn't hiss. She just watched him as she picked up the tray with long, thin hands and stepped back into the shadows. Mark didn't move. He didn't speak. He waited. She ate. Not fast, not messy, but slow. One piece at a time. Her eyes never leaving him. When she finished, she placed the tray near the edge again and returned to her corner. Mark stood. He didn't know what just happened, but it felt like the beginning of something. Not peace. Not yet. But maybe. Just maybe. Trust. He came back the next day. And the day after that. Always with food. Always with water. Each time she watched him a little longer. Each time her hissing grew softer. Until one day. She didn't hiss at all. Mark sat near the glass again. He tried drawing in the frost using his finger. Simple shapes. A sun. A planet. A tree. She tilted her head and came forward. She watched his hand move. Then she raised her hand and mimicked him. She drew too. Her shapes were sharper. More like stars and spirals. Symbols he didn't understand. Still, he smiled. She didn't smile back. But her eyes changed. Not soft. Not yet. But curious. Mark found an old voice recorder in the lab storage. He cleaned it up and powered it on. He played simple words through it. Hello. Friend. Food. Safe. She flinched the first time. But the second time she listened. When Mark said hello, she tried. Her voice was rough. Her throat dry. But she tried. He said friend. She said FRRNN. It wasn't perfect. But it was enough. He brought a blanket. Laid it outside the cell. The air was freezing even with the generators back online. She took it carefully. Wrapped herself in it with slow, unsure hands. Mark looked at her one day and asked, "What's your name?" She stared, then touched her chest, and said, "Vera." He repeated it. "Vera." She nodded once. It was the first time he heard her say anything without fear in her voice. That night he searched the logs again. There was no mention of her name. No mention of where she came from. Just more notes about her behavior. Aggressive. Hostile. Uncooperative. But Mark saw something else. Not a monster. Not a beast. But someone left behind. Someone trapped in a cage and forgotten. He brought a small drawing board from a storage room. And every day they drew together. He drew the earth. His house. His dog from when he was a boy. She drew her planet. a sky with two suns, tall trees shaped like bones, and a red river. It was strange, beautiful, sad. She started speaking more. Not much. Only 1 or 2 words at a time. Mark taught her simple sentences. She repeated them slowly. I am Vera. You are Mark. Safe here. No hurt. Stay. The words were heavy, but they came from her mouth, like music even if cracked and broken. One day she pressed her hand to the glass again. He pressed his hand on the other side, and for the first time, she didn't hiss. Mark returned to his room that night with a strange warmth in his chest, not from the heaters, but from her eyes that no longer burned like fire, but glowed like light through water. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about her, about what kind of person leaves someone like her in a cage, about what kind of world would forget her. He didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if he was doing the right thing, but he knew one thing. She had a name, she had a voice, and maybe, just maybe, she had a heart too. The night came fast on Glee 7's frozen moon, swallowing the base in thick shadows and icy silence as Mark sat alone in the control room, staring at the blinking screen that showed the lower levels, where Vera's cell still sat buried under frost and steel. Something felt different. The air was heavier than before, like the station was holding its breath. He checked the monitors again. The feed from sublevel 4 was dead. Just static. He tapped the screen. Nothing. Then he checked the door sensors. Warning flashed in pale blue across the screen. Containment cell 4. Status open. Mark froze. His mind raced through a dozen fears and questions, but none of them mattered now. She was out. He grabbed his light and the old stun blaster from the emergency locker. He had never used it before, never needed to. But now his fingers gripped it tight as he moved down the icy hallway's heart, pounding like a hammer in his chest. The elevator groaned as it descended to the lower level, the sound echoing like distant thunder in a storm. When the doors opened, cold air rushed in harder than before, like something inside had cracked the warmth apart. Mark stepped carefully through the corridor. The lights were dim, and the glass of her old cell door was shattered on one side. Inside, the room was empty. The blanket was gone. So was she. He found the food tray turned over in the corner, and claw marks deeper than before along the walls. But there was no sign of a struggle. Just a few drops of blood, bright blue against the metal floor. He followed the trail. Small smears and prints leading into the maintenance shaft. He knew those tunnels. Narrow and dark, filled with wires and shadows and long-forgotten sounds. He entered slowly, keeping his light low. Every breath he took felt loud. Every step echoed like thunder. Then he saw her. Vera sat in the corner of the tunnel, backed against the wall, one leg stretched out, blood running slowly from a cut along her thigh. Her skin looked pale, almost gray in the dim light, and her eyes were half closed. But when she saw him, she tried to move, tried to hiss, tried to crawl away. Mark raised his hands, showing no weapon. He knelt down a few feet from her and spoke softly. Vera, it's me. Mark, you're hurt. Let me help. She didn't answer. Her breath came out in short gasps. Her hand clutched the wound tight, trying to stop the bleeding. Mark set the blaster down and reached into his bag, pulling out a med pack. He opened it slowly, never taking his eyes off her. He showed her the bandages, the gel, the tools. She didn't speak, but she didn't move away either. Her eyes followed his hands as he worked, cleaning the wound, wrapping it, carefully, gently. When he finished, she leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. Mark sat beside her. Neither of them spoke, but she didn't hiss. She didn't growl. She just breathed. Later she whispered one word. Thank. It wasn't full. It wasn't clear. But it was real. Mark helped her back to the upper levels, through the hidden path, near the old cargo lift. He brought her to a small storage room near the power core. It was warm, hidden, safe. He made a place for her with blankets and light. Brought her more food, more water, more words. She healed slowly, but she healed. And in that time they spoke more. Not in full sentences. Not yet, but in shared sounds and gestures and simple truths. Her name, her home, her pain. She had been taken from her planet during a human mining expedition. Her people had fought back, but she had been captured, caged, brought here, and then forgotten. Mark listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask for more than she could give. One day she gave him a piece of metal. It was bent and shaped into a small curve, a symbol etched into the surface. Home. She said the word softly, pressing the shape to her chest. Mark nodded. He understood, even if he didn't know how. They spent days like that, in the warmth of the small room, surrounded by machines that no longer cared, in a station that had once been a prison, but now became a shelter. But peace never lasts. One evening, as Mark checked the station's main relay, a signal flashed across the screen. Incoming transmission. He opened a file. Static. Then words. This is Research Vessel Harrow. We are en route to Gliese, 7 Outpost Echo. Arrival in 48 hours. Prepare for sample recovery. Mark stared at the message. Sample. They didn't say Vera. They didn't say her name. They called her a sample. He ran back to her room, showed her the screen, tried to explain. She didn't speak, but her hand shook. She remembered. She knew. They were coming for her. Mark paced the room, thinking, planning. He couldn't let them take her. He wouldn't. He checked the escape pods. Only one still worked, hidden below the maintenance bay. Small and old, but functional. He could hide her there, send her away, somewhere safe, somewhere warm. He told her the plan, taught her how to use the controls, how to launch when the time came. She listened, carefully, eyes serious, voice quiet. Mark gave her a communicator, a simple one, with a signal that reached only a short range. But it was enough for now. She held it like it was made of stars. They spent that night preparing, gathering supplies, fixing the pod, clearing the path. And when it was done, they sat together in the cold, not speaking, just being. Two beings from two worlds, alone in the dark, bound by something neither could name. Mark looked at her and said, I won't let them hurt you. And for the first time, Vera smiled. Not wide, not long, but real. A smile made of ice and hope and quiet trust. But the night was not over, because somewhere above, far away but getting closer, the stars were moving, and the hunters were coming. The stars above the frozen moon seemed to shift and tremble as the research vessel Harrow approached slowly through the black silence of space, its engines humming with purpose, its lights cutting through the dark like blades of fire across the sky. Inside the station, Mark moved with urgency, but not panic, his hands steady as he prepared the final touches on the escape pod hidden beneath layers of rusted panels and broken metal deep within the old cargo bay. He kept looking over his shoulder, thinking about Vera, thinking about the way she had said her name, the way her voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years, but still held something strong. She sat on a crate nearby, wrapped in a blanket, watching him with those golden eyes, not glowing now, but soft and curious, like a fire learning how not to burn. Mark checked the systems one more time, making sure the launch panel worked, making sure the fuel cells were charged, making sure this escape was not just a dream wrapped in frost. Vera touched his shoulder, and he turned. She pointed at the small drawing board he had brought her earlier. She had drawn something again. A tree with wide roots and twin suns in the sky. Her home. She said the word slowly. Home. Mark nodded and tapped his chest. Earth. My home. Vera tilted her head, then drew another shape. Two circles joined by a line. Mark didn't understand right away. Then she touched his chest, then hers, and pointed to the line. Together. The meaning was simple, but powerful. Mark smiled, and she mirrored him this time. Without fear, without hiding behind the walls she had built inside herself. The moment passed quickly as the control screen blinked red with a new alert. The Harrow was entering orbit. Time was running out. He guided Vera through the plan again. She would wait here hidden in the pod until Mark gave the signal. Then she would launch away from the station, out of reach, out of danger. She repeated the steps back to him, her voice steadier, now her words clearer each time. She was learning fast. They shared a final moment of silence before he climbed back to the main deck, where he would meet the crew of the Harrow. He had to lie. He had to protect her. The Harrow's landing gear struck the ice with a heavy crunch as steam and snow blasted outward from the thrusters. 3 figures emerged in dark suits carrying scanners and tools, their faces hidden behind tinted helmets. Mark greeted them calmly, pretending nothing was wrong, pretending the station was just a broken place, full of dust and silence. The lead scientist removed her helmet, revealing a pale face with cold eyes and a sharp voice that cut through the room like a knife through glass. She asked about the logs, about the containment cell, about Subject V3. Mark answered slowly, choosing his words like stones across thin ice. He told them the logs were damaged. The power failures had corrupted the files. The subject had died years ago. Decomposition long since completed. They didn't believe him, not fully. But they found no body, no bones, no proof. Still, the lead scientist ordered a scan of the lower levels. Mark's stomach turned cold as he guided them away from the cargo bay, buying time, redirecting their attention to collapsed hallways and frozen labs. Back in the pod, Vera listened through the communicator, every sound filling her ears, every footstep echoing through her chest. She stayed still like he had told her, breathing slowly, quietly, waiting. The scientists scanned for life, but the cold and metal shielded much of the heat. They found nothing. Almost. One of them paused near the maintenance hatch, frowning. He knelt down, inspecting a fresh boot print left in a patch of thawed ice. It was too small to be Mark's. He called out to the others. Vera heard the voice, heard the footsteps coming closer. She whispered one word. Mark. Mark heard it in his earpiece and knew the time had come. He rushed forward, distracting the team, pulling their attention toward a false alert he had triggered on the upper deck. They ran after him, thinking something dangerous had awakened. Back in the bay, Vera opened the pod door. Her fingers moved fast, pressing the buttons like Mark taught her. The engine started to hum. The lights blinked. The pod was ready. But just as she reached for the launch switch, a sharp voice yelled from behind. Stop! One of the scientists had returned. He stood in the doorway, blaster raised, eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at her. He didn't shoot. Not right away. He called for backup. Vera stood frozen, unsure of what to do, torn between fear and trust. Then Mark's voice crackled through the earpiece. Now, Vera. Go now. She looked at the man in the doorway, then at the stars above through the small round window of the pod. She slammed her hand on the switch. The engines roared. The pod lifted. The scientist fired but missed as the ship blasted through the ceiling panels, launching into the sky like a comet tearing through the night. Mark saw it through the main window, a trail of light disappearing into the heavens. He didn't smile. Not yet, because they turned on him fast, grabbing his arms, yelling questions. Where did she go? What was that pod? What had he done? Mark said nothing. They locked him in a room on the upper deck, a cold place with no windows. But he didn't care, because she was free. Vera soared through the stars, her hands shaking, but her eyes focused on the screen as the pod flew faster and farther away from the moon. She looked back once, saw the tiny that was the station, and whispered 2 words. Thank you. Far behind her, Mark waited in silence, not knowing where she would go, not knowing what would happen next. But deep in his chest he felt something. Not fear, not regret, hope, because for the first time, she was more than a number, more than a test, more than a prisoner. She was Vera, and she was not alone anymore. The silence inside the holding room felt heavier than any wall as Mark sat on the cold metal bench, his hands cuffed behind his back, his head resting against the steel panel behind him, while a dull light buzzed above like it could barely stay awake. They had not spoken to him since locking the door. Not a question, not a warning, not a word, only the slam of the lock and the quiet scrape of footsteps as they walked away. He closed his eyes, trying to picture where Vera would be now, trying to follow the map in his mind of the stars above, hoping the pod had made it past the orbit, hoping her small vessel would not be caught by a patrol or burned up by a wrong calculation. She had never flown before, never left the station, never known anything outside the frozen steel. But she had learned, she had listened, and she had gone. Mark heard the soft beep of the door control and looked up as the lead scientist walked in, her arms crossed and her mouth twisted into a cold, tight line. She stared at him for a moment, then tossed a data pad onto the bench beside him. "You lied," she said. "You hid classified material. You tampered with containment logs. You aided the escape of a level 3 specimen." Mark said nothing. His mouth was dry and his throat sore. But silence was safer than truth. "Do you know what she is?" she asked. "She's not a pet. Not a guest. She's a weapon." Mark looked up at her slowly, his eyes tired but firm. "She's not a weapon," he said. "She's a person." The scientist laughed, once sharp and hollow. "You're not a judge of what's human. You're just an engineer." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "They're coming back," she said. "The board. The original research team. They want to recover what was lost. And they will." The door closed again, and the lock snapped into place. Mark leaned forward, his mind racing. The board. They were the ones who started this. The ones who had captured Vera. Who locked her away. Who called her subject and number and sample. They would tear the stars apart to get her back. He had to act fast. Had to find a way out before they arrived. 2 floors below the main lab, Vera's escape pod drifted slowly into the edge of a nearby asteroid field. The stars outside spun slowly as the pod's guidance system struggled to keep a straight path. She sat inside, curled up in the pilot seat, clutching the small communicator close to her chest, listening to the quiet static, hoping for Mark's voice. But nothing came. She pressed buttons again, whispering his name. "Mark, Mark." But only silence answered. She remembered the controls, the directions, the way he showed her how to steer, how to find the old relay station on the outer rim. It was far, but she had the path locked in the pod's memory. She breathed deep and gripped the handles. She would find it. She would wait. She would be safe. And maybe he would follow. Back on the station, the Harrow's crew began preparations for the return of the research board. They cleared the labs, opened old crates, dusted off equipment that had not been touched in years, all for the arrival of the men who started it all. Mark watched from a small screen in his cell as they moved with mechanical purpose. They had no idea who she was, what she had become. He thought about the first time he saw her, curled in that frozen corner, hissing like an animal, eyes wide with rage and fear. And then he thought of her last smile. He stood and moved to the panel on the wall, pressed his fingers against the loose wiring he had spotted earlier. If they were coming, he had to warn her. It took time, more than he had, but eventually the panel sparked, and the communicator in his pocket buzzed weakly to life. A voice cracked through the static. It was hers. "Mark." "Where?" He whispered back as quietly as he could. Told her they were coming. Told her to keep going. Told her not to stop. Not to trust anyone. Her reply came slow, but strong. "Safe. I go. I wait." Then silence again. But it was enough. The day of the board's arrival came fast. A large silver ship docked above the base, sleek and sharp like a blade of ice. From its doors stepped 6 figures dressed in dark uniforms, their faces hidden behind gold visors. They moved like kings returning to an old castle. No hesitation. No questions. The lead man opened his data scroll and spoke with a voice that echoed across the bay. "Bring us the sample. Bring us the creature." The Harrow's crew explained that it had escaped, that the logs had been falsified, that one of their own had helped her. They dragged Mark in front of the board, his cuffs tighter than before, blood on his wrist where the metal had cut deep. The lead man looked down at him with empty eyes. "Where is it? Where did you send it?" Mark raised his head slowly and said only one word. "Free." The man struck him once across the face. But Mark didn't fall. "You will tell us," he said, "or we will rip it from your mind." They activated a neural scanner, a sharp machine with long needles and pulsing lights. Mark gritted his teeth as it buzzed near his skull. Then something exploded in the distance. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered. The base shook as a power relay burst from overload. In the chaos, Mark slipped free, ran down the corridor, dodged guards, and leapt over broken wires. His breath sharp, his chest burning. He reached the lower deck, entered the maintenance bay. and sent one last message on the hidden frequency. "Run, Vera. Run." Then they caught him again, but far beyond the asteroid field. Inside her small pod, Vera heard the signal. She looked out at the stars, eyes full of fire and fear, and she pressed forward, past the edge of the system, past the reach of men who called her sample. She was Vera. She would not be taken again. The silence in the control chamber was thick like ice forming over still water as the bored ship hovered above the research station, its lights casting long shadows down the frozen halls where machines hummed like whispers from the past, and every step echoed like a warning. Mark sat in the chair, bolted to the floor, his hands bound once more, his lips bruised, and blood on his shirt where they had struck him during questioning, but his eyes still burned with something they could not name, something defiant and unbroken. The lead researcher stood nearby, staring at the monitor where the last transmission flickered weakly across the screen, a pulse of sound that had been meant only for her. They knew now. They knew the creature was not dead. She had escaped. She was out there somewhere in the stars, and they wanted her back. Mark leaned forward, speaking slowly, through cracked lips. "She's gone. You won't find her. Not now, not ever." The researcher turned slowly, voice calm but sharp. "We will find her. We created the signal that binds her. We trained the pain into her nerves. We made her obedient." Mark laughed, once bitter and tired. "You never broke her. You only taught her how to survive." The man raised a hand, and the guard stepped forward. "Lock him in the observation cell. When she is recovered, he will be the one to bring her back." They didn't understand. They didn't know what she had become. She was no longer the broken, silent thing they remembered. She had a voice now, a mind sharp as light, a heart that had begun to heal. Far beyond the frozen moon, across a sea of drifting stars, Vera sat in the small escape pod, her eyes scanning the quiet void, her hand steady on the controls as she drifted near an old satellite tower blinking faintly on the edge of a forgotten orbital path. She had followed the path Mark gave her, through the silent debris fields, past the gravity wells, to this place. A ghost in the dark. The pod latched to the side of the tower and sealed itself with a soft hiss. She moved through the narrow hatch and stepped into the old comm station, where dust floated like snow in zero gravity, and old screens blinked in tired colors. She turned on the signal jammer. Mark had shown her how. Then she listened, waited, watched the sky for the ships that might come. The first came 2 days later. Small, fast, marked with the symbol of the board. She stayed hidden, her heat shield active, her systems cold, invisible in the void. The ship passed, unaware, too fast to see her, but more would follow. She knew they would, so she made a choice. She accessed the station logs, set a signal, a false one, encoded with an old signature from her containment cell. It pointed back toward a different sector, an uninhabited moon, a trail of breadcrumbs made from lies and memory. Back at the research base, the signal arrived. The lead scientist smiled. "We have her," he said. "Set course now." The ship turned, left orbit, followed the trail. Mark watched from his cell as the stars shifted. He felt something warm for the first time in days. Hope. They had taken the bait. Vera floated in the silent station, listening as her false signal pulled them away. She watched the stars grow quiet again. She spoke to the empty room, low and calm. "Mark. Safe." She turned on the hidden channel. Broadcast only one message. 3 words. "Still with you." Back in his cell, Mark heard the message. A single flicker on the screen. His heart beat faster. She was alive. She had not run. She had stayed. He knew now what had to be done. With the guards distracted and systems rerouted to follow the false lead, Mark broke the seal on the panel near his bed. Inside was the emergency override. Hidden. Forgotten. He used it to unlock the door. Moved quietly through the maintenance shaft. Heart pounding with every step. He reached the lower deck. Entered the archive room. Found the original logs of Project V3. He uploaded the data to a hidden channel. Sent it to the outer network. Let the world see what they had done. The experiments. The torture. The lies. They would not be able to hide anymore. But as he turned to leave, a shadow stepped into the hall. One of the board's men. Gun raised. Mark didn't run. Didn't speak. Just stared. Then a blast of light came from behind the guard. He fell. Unmoving. Behind him stood a figure in a pressure suit. Breathing heavy. Eyes glowing gold behind the visor. Vera. She had come back. She stepped forward. Lifted Mark to his feet. He stared at her in disbelief. How? She pointed up. To a stolen shuttle. To the stars above. Then pointed down the hall. No time. They ran. Through the ice and steam. Through halls that once held pain. Now echoing with fire. Guards shouted. Alarm screamed. But nothing could stop them now. They reached the hangar. Climbed into the shuttle. Launched into the sky. Below. The base shrank. Burned. Fell into silence. Mark looked over at her. She stared ahead. Silent. But her hand reached out and held his. No words were needed. They flew on. Through the dark. Through the stars. Free. Together. The stars outside the shuttle shimmered like silver embers drifting across a sea of darkness, their soft glow casting pale light over the curved walls of the cockpit, as Vera sat still, her fingers dancing lightly across the controls, with a focus as calm as it was sharp. Beside her, Mark leaned back, breathing slow, his body still sore, but his mind filled with something deeper than pain, something like peace, something unfamiliar but welcome. They had escaped, but escape was not the end. The ship was small, stolen, and old, its systems barely enough to keep them from freezing in the vastness between stars, but they had each other, and that made the silence bearable. The silence no longer meant loneliness, it meant safety, it meant healing, it meant home. Vera adjusted the navigation slowly, tracing an invisible path through a belt of shattered moons ahead, where gravity fields spun rocks in slow spirals, like dancers caught in endless loops. Her eyes never blinked, her breath steady. Mark watched her, trying to understand all the things she didn't say, trying to hear all the words she could never speak. Yet somehow, he did. Somehow her silence said more than any voice could. The stars outside shimmered again, and then something new appeared, a ship bigger than the others. It drifted silently, its engines cold, its lights dark. Vera saw it first, her head tilted just slightly, and her hand hovered over the controls. Not a twitch of panic, not a sound of fear, just stillness. Mark followed her gaze, his brow tightening. He knew this shape. He remembered the design from the diagrams on the station. This was one of the hidden ships, one of the prototypes built for war. But this one looked abandoned. Vera moved the shuttle closer, her body tense, her fingers slow. The two of them watched as their ship approached the dead, one like a shadow creeping toward a forgotten monument. They docked with a soft magnetic pull. The tunnel connected, and the hatch opened. Inside was darkness and dust, but something else too, something humming quietly, like a memory not quite gone. They stepped into the old ship, the gravity weak, the air stale, their boots echoing on metal floors. Vera walked first, her steps careful, her eyes always moving. She was listening to the walls, to the echoes, to something Mark could not hear, but he trusted her. They passed long halls filled with old pods, some shattered, some still sealed, each one marked with a code and a number. No names, just numbers. Mark realized what this place was. This had been a prison, a lab, another cage for something or someone. Vera paused at one pod, her hand pressed to the glass. It was empty, cracked open long ago, but she stood there unmoving, as if remembering something, as if mourning. She turned and walked again, this time toward the command deck, where an old console flickered with dying light. She powered it on, and data filled the screen. Mark stepped beside her, reading. Project V5. Terminated. Subject escaped. Unknown location. He looked at her slowly, and she nodded. This had been her last cage. But not only hers. There were others. She brought up more files. Dozens of entries. All terminated. All escaped. Or dead. Mark felt a chill that had nothing to do with cold. She was not the only one. Not the only victim. Not the only survivor. She looked at him, eyes shining with something ancient, something full of rage and sorrow. He nodded slowly. We tell the truth. She began copying the data, her fingers moving fast across the console, her mind mapping every line, every file, every name and number. Mark helped organizing the files, setting up a broadcast loop, sending the truth across all open frequencies. The truth would reach every corner of human space, every planet, every station, every place where lies had taken root. They would all know. Vera stepped back, watching the signal go. Her chest rose and fell slowly like waves pulling away from shore. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder, not to guide, not to lead, but simply to stand with her. The ship trembled suddenly, a signal incoming. Mark checked the sensors. Another ship approaching fast. Not from the board, from someone else. Unknown design. They prepared for the worst. But when the ship arrived, it did not fire. It sent a signal. 3 tones. Simple and soft. Vera's eyes widened just slightly. She responded with the same tones. Mark looked at her. "What is it?" She answered with a gesture. Another like her. The second ship docked and the hatch opened. From its stepped a tall figure, armor cracked, scars deep across its body, eyes glowing blue in the dim light. It looked at Vera and then at Mark and then back again. A slow nod. Recognition. Respect. They were not enemies. They were not alone. Vera stepped forward and placed her hand over her heart, then reached it out toward the other being. The gesture was returned. Mark watched in silence. Something old was being remembered. Something powerful. The figure spoke in a language that was not sound but still carried meaning. It told a story of cages and pain, of escape and silence, of running through stars with no place to land. Vera listened, her eyes full of fire. When it was done, she spoke back, and together they turned to Mark. He understood nothing of the words, but everything of their meaning. This was not just survival now. This was something more. This was a beginning. They spent the night in the old ship, exchanging knowledge, sharing files, mapping the hidden routes where others might still be trapped. Vera showed them how to hide, how to mask signals, how to speak in code. Mark gave them names, gave them words for pain and hope and freedom. In the morning, they left the broken ship behind. It drifted in the stars, now empty, but no longer forgotten. Vera and Mark boarded their shuttle again, and the new ally followed. They would find the others. They would bring them home. And when the stars asked who they were, they would answer, "We are the ones who remember. We are the ones who survived. We are the ones who do not forget." Together they flew into the starlight. Not alone, not hunted, not afraid, but free. And the stars watched them go with silence and wonder.